My name's Sam, and for the last 4 months, I've been clocking in as a stage technician at the Mariners Playhouse. Before this gig, my experience with theater was limited to watching my niece's excruciatingly long elementary school pageants. Now, I spend my days wrestling with fly systems, coaxing ancient spotlights to behave, and trying to decipher the cryptic grunts of a crew that seems to communicate more through shared glances than actual words. It's a physical job, no doubt about it, lifting heavy flats, scaling ladders that feel like they belong on a pirate ship, and constantly moving in the dim, dusty labyrinth that is backstage. My hands are usually caked in grease or sawdust, and there's a permanent crick in my neck from craning to see some rigging issue. The Playhouse itself is a relic, a grand old dame with peeling paint and a pervasive scent of mildew, old velvet, and something else, something faintly metallic, like rain on rusted iron. It's been standing for over a century, they say, and you can feel every one of those years in the creak of the floorboards and the way the air just hangs, thick and heavy, in the wings. Most days, it's just a job. A blue-collar grind of making sure the show goes on, a rhythm of rehearsals, set changes, and the satisfying clatter of tools. But then there are the rules, the unspoken ones, the ones you learn not from a handbook, but from a sharp elbow to the ribs, or a hissed whisper in the dark. My orientation, if you could even call it that, was more a trial by fire. Mick, the grizzled head tech with a perpetually wary look in his eyes, just pointed to a stack of lumber and grunted, "Move it." That was pretty much the extent of my formal training. The rest I picked up by watching, by making mistakes, and by observing the strange rituals of the veteran crew. Take, for instance, dressing room 7. It's the smallest, tucked away in a corner of the performer's corridor, and it's always vacant, always. Even when the house is packed and every other dressing room is bursting with nervous actors, number 7 remains dark, its door usually ajar, revealing a sliver of dusty gloom within. I remember one Tuesday, early on, I was dragging a bulky costume rack past it, on my way to the costume shop. The caster wheels screeched on the worn linoleum, echoing a little too loudly in the quiet corridor. As I passed dressing room 7, I glanced in, just a quick, idle peek. Inside, the room was Spartan, even by the Playhouse's standards. A chipped vanity, a single, uncomfortable-looking chair, and then, catching the dim light from the corridor, an old mirror. It was ornate, framed in dark, tarnished wood, far too grand for such a cramped space. The glass itself was cloudy, speckled with age spots, giving it a milky, dreamlike quality. As my eyes lingered, something felt off. Not threatening, not yet, just wrong, like looking into a pool of still water that was deeper than it appeared, holding more than just a reflection. Before I could consciously process the unease, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was Dave, a lanky stagehand who'd been here since the dinosaurs roamed the earth, or so it seemed. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Hey, new guy," he muttered, his voice low, almost a growl. "Rule number 1, don't look in there, not into that mirror, not ever." He didn't explain. He didn't elaborate. He just steered me away, his eyes darting back to the dressing room door as if expecting something to lurch out. The warning wasn't delivered with anger, but with a quiet, palpable fear that pricked at the hairs on my arms. It wasn't a casual instruction like, "Don't touch the hot lights," or "Mind your head on the fly bars." This was different. This was reverent. That was the first time I truly felt the chill of the Mariners Playhouse, a cold that had nothing to do with faulty heating. It was a premonition, a subtle whisper against the skin that something here was fundamentally out of sync with the world outside those brick walls. Another strange protocol involved the loading dock. It's a cramped, perpetually damp space that smells of diesel fumes and wet wood. We use it for everything from bringing in set pieces to hauling out rubbish. But there's a strict rule about the last truck out at night. No matter what, it has to be empty, and someone has to stand at the dock entrance, watching it leave until its taillights vanish down the alley. Mick usually did it, sometimes Dave. They'd stand there, stoic, until the rumbling faded. I thought it was some kind of security measure, but then I saw Mick do it one night after we'd loaded out only a few empty bins. Nothing valuable. He stood there in the drizzling rain, his silhouette hunched, watching nothing but the gray mist for a full 5 minutes after the last bin truck disappeared. He looked less like a guard and more like a sentry, fulfilling a duty to an unseen force. "Just making sure," he'd said once, catching me watching him, his eyes scanning the empty alley with an intensity that unsettled me. "Don't want anything. Following us inside. Following us inside." The phrase echoed in my mind, conjuring images of phantom hitchhikers or unseen presences clinging to the back of a truck, slipping into the Playhouse unnoticed. It wasn't about theft, it was about something far more insidious. Then there was the trapdoor on the main stage. It's an old mechanism, creaky but functional, used for quick disappearances or dramatic entrances from below. But it's only ever opened when absolutely necessary for a performance. Never during set changes, never during rehearsals, unless specifically called for by the stage manager for that exact moment. And if it is opened, even for a moment, it must be sealed immediately. No lingering, no peeking into the dark void beneath. One afternoon, a new prop master, Sarah, who was even greener than me, accidentally nudged the latch while dragging a heavy stage couch. The old wood groaned, and the trapdoor lifted a few inches, revealing a sliver of absolute inky blackness. Before it could fall back, Mick was there, moving with surprising speed for a man his age. He slammed it shut with a resounding thud that vibrated through the floorboards. His face was pale, his lips a tight, grim line. "What are you doing, girl?" he'd snarled, his voice unusually sharp. "You don't ever open that. Not unless the script says so, and even then, you keep it quick. You understand?" Sarah, startled, just nodded, mutely. Mick then spent a good 5 minutes fiddling with the latch, double-checking it, even wedging a discarded piece of wood under the seam, as if the door itself might try to spring open again on its own. It was an overreaction, disproportionate to the accidental nudge, but the fear in his eyes was real, a raw, primal thing that made my stomach clench. These aren't just quirks of an old building or the superstitions of theater folk. These are rules, enforced, with consequences that are implied, but never articulated. It's a constant, low thrum of anxiety that permeates the air backstage, a sense that we're not just putting on a show, but performing a delicate, dangerous ritual. And I, the new guy, am slowly, reluctantly, becoming an initiate into this strange, silent order. The Playhouse has a personality, a presence. It's not just bricks and mortar. It feels like something is watching, waiting, and the strange rules. They're less about maintaining the building and more about maintaining a delicate balance. A balance with what? I don't know. But I'm starting to get the distinct feeling that breaking one of these unspoken rules isn't just going to get you a reprimand from Mick, but something far, far worse. Tonight, after the last curtain call and the audience had shuffled out, I was tasked with cleaning up the orchestra pit. The house lights were down, save for the single, bare bulb of the ghost light on the stage, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like unseen figures in the vast auditorium. The air was thick with the lingering scent of perfume and sweat from the crowd, and a strange, cold draft seemed to swirl around me, despite all the doors being shut. As I wiped down the brass stands, I heard a faint, rhythmic scratching sound coming from somewhere above me, from the catwalks. It wasn't the sound of a rat or a settling beam. It was too deliberate, too musical, like tiny dry fingers dragging across rough wood. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my eyes straining into the darkness above. Nothing, just the shadows and the persistent, unsettling rhythm. I looked up at the stage, at the single bulb of the ghost light, a tiny beacon against the immense darkness. It felt less like a safety measure and more like an offering, a ward. And as I gathered my cleaning supplies, the scratching stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving behind only the echoing silence of an empty theater. I packed up quicker than usual, eager to be out in the regular, noisy world. The strange rules were becoming less abstract, more immediate, and I had a feeling the Playhouse was just beginning to introduce me to its true, unsettling nature. The faint scratching from the catwalks stayed with me that night, a tiny, irritating burr under the saddle of my mind. I tried to dismiss it as the building settling, or a particularly ambitious rat, or just my imagination running wild in the atmospheric gloom of an old theater. But the memory of Mick's pale face when Sarah nearly opened the trap door, and Dave's urgent warning about the mirror, had already sown a fertile seed of doubt. The Mariners' Playhouse wasn't just old, it felt aware. The following week started with the usual grind. We were prepping for a new melodrama, all oversized props and dramatic backdrops. My hands were perpetually sticky with scenic glue, and my clothes dusted with glitter from some gaudy stage costume. The physical labor was a welcome distraction, grounding me in the tangible. But even amidst the mundane, the anomalies began to pile up. Small at first, like crumbs leading to a larger, hungrier beast. One afternoon, I was setting up a series of practical lights for a dimly lit parlor scene. I had a full toolbox at my feet, open and organized. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a wire stripper, rolls of gaffer tape. I reached for my trusty Phillips head, the one with the bright yellow handle, only to find it gone. Annoying, but not unusual. Tools get misplaced. I rummaged, grumbled, and eventually grabbed a different one. 10 minutes later, as I was coiling a cable, I saw it. My yellow-handled Phillips head perched neatly on the very top of a lighting rig, about 15 feet above the stage. Now, getting up there involves a specific creaky ladder and a bit of a climb. I hadn't been up there. No one else had been either. Mick was on break, and Dave was painting a flat in the scene shop. It wasn't a drop, either. It was placed, deliberately. And not just placed, but positioned, as if someone had set it there with care, perhaps to get a better view. I felt a cold prickle on my neck. It wasn't mischievous. It felt observant, like a child playing a quiet trick, but with an unsettling, knowing quality. "You lose something, Sam." Mick's voice, startlingly close, made me jump. He'd approached silently, as he often did, like a shadow detaching itself from the deeper gloom of the wings. His eyes, though, weren't on me. They were fixed on the screwdriver, glinting innocently on the high rig. A faint frown creased his forehead, deepening the lines around his eyes. "Yeah, my Phillips head," I admitted, pointing. "Must have walked off. Weird place for it to end up." Mick didn't reply immediately. He just stared at the screwdriver, a peculiar expression on his face. It wasn't surprise or even annoyance. It was more like resignation, tinged with something like respect or fear. "Get it down," he finally said, his voice flat. "And next time, keep your tools where they belong. Some things, they like to play. Don't encourage them. Don't encourage them." The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. It wasn't a scolding for carelessness. It was a warning against interaction, as if the Playhouse itself had a mischievous inhabitant, and acknowledging its presence, even through a misplaced tool, was an invitation. I climbed the ladder, retrieved the screwdriver, and when my fingers brushed the cold metal, I imagined a faint residual chill, not from the temperature, but from something else, something unseen. The chills weren't always imagined. There were specific areas, usually in the deep recesses of the substage or the unused prop storage rooms, where the temperature would plummet suddenly, even on a warm day. Not a drafty chill, but a dense, heavy cold that felt like it pressed against your eardrums. I'd mention it to Dave or Mick, and they'd just shrug, old building or heating's shot. But their eyes would always flick around the room, a little too quickly, a little too often. They never lingered in those spots. They did their work or got what they needed, and moved on with a quiet, efficient haste that belied their otherwise unhurried pace. Then came the whispers, faint, indistinct, like snippets of conversation caught on the wind, but always from empty spaces. I'd be alone on the stage, checking focus on a spot, and hear what sounded like a murmur from the balcony, or in the scene shop, hammering away, and hear a hushed giggle from the costume racks. My head would snap up, adrenaline spiking, but there'd be nothing, just the silence, heavier and more profound after the fleeting sound. I'd always been a rational guy. I believed in tangible explanations, but the Playhouse was systematically chipping away at my skepticism. It was a slow, insidious erosion, one misplaced tool, one cold spot, one phantom whisper at a time. It felt like the building was testing my boundaries, seeing how much I could endure before I started to question the very fabric of reality within its walls. The breaking point for my lingering rationality came one late Tuesday night. We were doing a final technical run-through of the melodrama. The stage was set for a dramatic, stormy night scene, complete with thunder and lightning effects. During a particularly loud thunderclap, generated by a huge sheet of suspended metal shaken vigorously, the power to one entire lighting bank on stage flickered and died. A minor setback, easily fixed with a breaker reset. Mick, with a sigh, headed for the fuse box backstage. Dave and I were left on stage, waiting in the sudden, partial darkness. The storm effects were still running on the other banks, so a simulated downpour was hitting the stage, and the wind machine was kicking up a low howl. In the midst of this controlled chaos, I heard it again, not a whisper, but a clear, resonant hum, like a tuning fork, or the sustained note of a cello, but with an otherworldly purity to it. It seemed to emanate from the very center of the stage, directly above the sealed trapdoor. I looked at Dave. He was a veteran, seen it all, rarely flustered, but his face, illuminated by the flashing lightning effects, was ghost white. His eyes were wide, staring at the stage floor. He wasn't looking at the prop rain or the wind machine. He was looking down. The hum intensified, rising in pitch, and then, slowly, impossibly, the heavy, ancient wooden trapdoor on the stage began to lift. Just a crack at first, letting out a sliver of profound darkness and a gust of air that carried the smell of damp earth and something acrid, like burnt sugar. The hum became a low thrum, a vibration that I could feel in the soles of my feet. Dave let out a choked sound, a strangled primal gasp that was utterly devoid of his usual gruff demeanor. He scrambled backward, tripping over a sandbag, his eyes locked on the rising trapdoor. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't an old building settling. This was deliberate. And the fear emanating from Dave was so raw, so potent, it infected me instantly, bypassing all my logical defenses. "Don't look in it, Sam! Don't you dare look!" Dave hissed, his voice trembling, barely audible over the mock thunder. He was clawing at his pockets, fumbling for something, anything. The hum peaked, and the trapdoor, against all mechanical reason, lifted another full inch, exposing more of the abyssal darkness beneath. From that crack, a cold draft intensified, swirling with that acrid smell. And then, for a fleeting moment, I saw something in the blackness, not a distinct shape, but a ripple, a deeper shadow within the shadow, like light bending around an invisible mass. It was immense, a profound absence of light that seemed to draw everything towards it. Just then, the lights on the affected bank flickered back on with a loud thunk as Mick reset the breaker. The sudden blaze of light seemed to startle whatever was lurking beneath. The hum died, the acrid smell dissipated, and with a creak that sounded almost like a sigh, the trapdoor settled back into place with a gentle, final click. It was as if it had never moved. Mick walked back onto the stage, oblivious to what had just transpired in the darkness. "Bloody ancient wiring," he grumbled, looking at the now functioning lights. "All right, let's pick it up from... What was that noise?" He looked at Dave, who was still sprawled on the floor, breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat. Dave just shook his head, unable to speak, pointing a trembling finger at the trap door. Mick's eyes followed, and for a brief moment, a flicker of understanding and something akin to grim satisfaction crossed his face. He knew. He always knew. "Just the wind, Dave," Mick said, his voice surprisingly calm, almost dismissive. But then he walked over to the trap door. He didn't inspect the latch. He just stood over it for a long moment, his shoulders hunched, his head bowed as if in prayer. Then with a slow, deliberate movement, he pulled a small, tarnished silver locket from beneath his shirt, clutched it in his fist, and pressed it firmly against the trapdoor for several seconds. His eyes squeezed shut. It was a silent, private ritual, an appeasement. He looked up at me then, his eyes holding a depth of warning I couldn't have comprehended just a week ago. "Some things in this place, Sam, they got a taste for being seen, for being heard. Don't give them the satisfaction. You see things, you hear things, you keep it to yourself. You don't acknowledge them. Not if you want to keep your skin." The implications were chilling. These wasn't just old theater superstitions or the quirks of an old building. These were rules born of necessity, of survival, rules to keep something at bay, something that had just tried to breach its confines, something with a hum and a taste for observation, an unseen audience in the dark. And I had just witnessed its attempt to make a grand entrance. The Playhouse wasn't just observing me, it was testing me, and I was failing simply by noticing. My shift ended, but sleep didn't come easy. The hum of the trap door resonated in my bones, and the image of that ripple in the darkness was burned into my retinas. The Playhouse had always felt like it had an unseen audience, but now I knew that audience wasn't just watching a play, it was watching us. And I was starting to understand that the ghost light, the untouched mirror, the empty loading dock, these weren't just strange rules. They were part of a larger, elaborate prison, a cage we were all helping to maintain without fully knowing what it contained. The image of that trap door slowly lifting, the sound of that inhuman hum, and the sheer terror on Dave's face had rearranged something fundamental in my understanding of the world. My skepticism, once a sturdy shield, was now riddled with holes, letting in a bitter, unbidden cold. Mick's quiet ritual with the locket, his urgent, "Don't acknowledge him," echoed in my mind like a constant, low thrum. The Mariners' Playhouse wasn't just old. It was alive with something ancient and hungry, and the strange rules weren't quirks. They were a desperate, fragile truce. The next few shifts were different. The mundane tasks of stagecraft felt charged. Every creak of the floorboards or gust of wind through a cracked window pane sending a shiver down my spine. I found myself instinctively avoiding dressing room 7, not just the mirror, but the entire doorway, giving it a wide berth like an open sewer. I kept my tools tightly secured, no longer wanting to encourage any playful interactions. The whispers still came, faint and indistinct, but now I deliberately ignored them, focusing on the clang of my wrench or the scratch of my pen on a clipboard, trying to anchor myself in the tangible world. It was during a particularly grueling late-night set strike, when the theater was utterly silent, save for our work, that Mick brought up the ghostlight protocol. We were clearing the stage, breaking down a lavish ballroom set for the melodrama. The main house lights were off, and the work lights were dim, casting long, dramatic shadows. The single bare bulb of the ghost light, perched on its stand downstage center, burned like a lonely sentinel, its pale yellow glow barely touching the edges of the vast, empty auditorium. "All right, Sam," Mick grunted, wrestling a heavy wooden pillar with surprising ease. "Last thing before you lock up tonight, ghost light. You know the drill?" I knew it conceptually. The ghost light is a theatrical tradition, a single lamp left on stage after everyone has left. Safety, they say, to prevent people from tripping in the dark. But Mick's tone, the way his eyes darted from the light to the cavernous gloom of the upper reaches of the fly system, suggested something more. "Yeah, just leave it on," I replied, wiping sawdust from my brow. Mick stopped, turning to face me fully. His expression was serious, almost solemn. "Not just leave it on, new guy. You gotta treat it right. This ain't just for tripping hazards. This is for keeping the stage warm, keeping the right kind of light on things. You understand?" He walked over to the ghost light, a sturdy, old-fashioned lamp with a wire cage protecting the bulb. He didn't just glance at it. He studied it, almost reverently, like a priest before an altar. He ran a gloved hand over the bulb, checking its warmth. "Every night," he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "before you leave, you make sure it's dead center. Not a foot off, not a hair off, dead center. And you check the bulb. If it's even thinking about going out, you swap it immediately. No excuses. We don't want the stage to get cold, Sam. Not ever. Cold." The word hung in the air, echoing the specific, pressing chill I'd felt in those dark, unused spaces. He wasn't talking about literal temperature. He was talking about something far more profound, a chill that hinted at the presence of the unseen audience, waiting in the darkness beyond the single bulb's reach. "And when you put it there," he continued, his eyes fixed on the light, "you look at it, you focus on it, you imagine it pushing back the dark, you imagine it holding everything. Still, you give it your respect, because it's doing a job, a damn important job." He paused, then looked at me, his gaze piercing. "Some people say it's for the ghosts, to light their way so they don't get lost. Load of crap. It's not for the ghosts, Sam. It's for us, to keep them from walking where they shouldn't, to keep the stage from getting too inviting." He was telling me, without explicitly saying it, that the ghost light was a ward, a magical barrier, a piece of practical equipment imbued with a supernatural purpose. And my role as a stage technician was not just to operate it, but to participate in the ritual, to lend my own intent to its protective glow. This wasn't in any technical manual. This was a deep-seated belief system, enforced with the quiet authority of a man who had seen too much. From then on, every night I was the last to leave. I performed the ghost light protocol with a meticulousness that bordered on religious fervor. I centered it, checked the bulb, and stood for a moment, silently willing its light to push back the encroaching shadows. I imagined it as a small, defiant sun against a cosmic night, holding the Playhouse's hungry darkness at bay. Beyond the ghost light, there were other peculiar rules concerning props and equipment. Certain pieces of archaic stage machinery, for example, were treated with a reverence that seemed disproportionate to their function. There was an old, hand-cranked wind machine, a huge wooden drum with canvas stretched over it, that still saw occasional use. It was kept meticulously clean, oiled, and covered with a heavy canvas drape when not in use. But its covering wasn't just any tarp. It was a faded patchwork quilt, stitched with symbols that looked vaguely Celtic, or maybe just old theater patterns. That quilt, Dave had told me once, gesturing to it as we passed the machine. "Don't ever move it, not unless you're using the machine, and then you put it right back. It keeps the voice quiet." The voice. He'd said it so casually, as if a sentient vocal entity resided within the wind machine. I thought of the rhythmic scratching from the catwalks. Was that a voice? Was the hum from the trapdoor a voice? It was becoming clear that the playhouse wasn't just haunted. It was inhabited by multiple distinct entities, each with their own needs and quirks that the rules were designed to manage. Another rule, one that bordered on the absurd, involved the collection of old playbills. In the prop storage, there was a dusty corner filled with crates of old programs from past productions, going back decades. It was a fire hazard, frankly, and I'd suggested to Mick that we should probably recycle some of the older duplicate stacks. He just stared at me, his eyes wide with genuine alarm. Recycle them? Are you insane, Sam? They're important. They keep the memories grounded. You don't throw out the memories in a place like this. They'll just look for them. And if they can't find them in the paper, they'll look for them in us. The thought of an unseen entity, a memory-hungry presence, rifling through my mind like an unfiled archive, was deeply unsettling. The playbills, the stage's history, were not just mementos. They were anchors, a distraction. They provided the audience with a narrative, preventing it from inventing its own, perhaps more gruesome, tales within our heads. The layers of the supernatural were becoming terrifyingly intricate. Each strange rule isn't isolated. It is part of a complex, interconnected system, a fragile tapestry woven to contain or appease the myriad unseen forces lurking within the playhouse. My job was no longer just about mechanics and logistics. It was about participating in this elaborate daily ritual of containment. I was a caretaker, not just of the sets and lights, but of the very delicate balance between our world and whatever else resided here. One particularly stormy evening, as I was performing the Ghostlight protocol, the wind howled outside, rattling the old theater's windows like skeletal fingers. The building groaned and shuddered. As I stood before the Ghostlight, its single bulb pushing back against the encroaching darkness, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching, just like from the catwalks, but this time it seemed to emanate from the very walls around me. It was too close, too persistent. And then, woven into the scratching, I heard it. A whisper, clearer than any before. Not a word I could understand, but a distinct feminine voice humming a low, melancholic tune. It was coming from the shadows directly behind the proscenium arch, just where the stage curved into the wings. I felt an instinctual urge to turn, to look, to confirm what I was hearing, to break Mick's cardinal rule. But something stopped me. The Ghostlight, burning steady and bright before me, seemed to pulse with a faint internal energy, a subtle vibration that coursed through the stage floor beneath my feet. It was almost as if the light itself was warning me, urging me to focus, to maintain the ward. I stood rooted, staring at the bulb, forcing myself to project my intent into its glow, willing it to hold back the encroaching sound. The humming continued, growing slightly louder, a mournful, drawn-out note. The scratching intensified, like nails on rough plaster. It felt like a direct challenge, a temptation to acknowledge the unseen audience that so desperately wanted to be seen. I stood there, probably for a full minute, caught between the siren call of the unknown and the dire warnings of Mick and Dave. My heart hammered against my ribs, and a cold sweat trickled down my back. I could feel the presence, a distinct weight in the air just behind my right shoulder, a breath that wasn't mine. But I didn't turn. I couldn't. I focused on the Ghostlight, a single defiant point of light against an immense, hungry darkness. Slowly, subtly, the humming began to fade. The scratching retreated until only the howl of the wind outside remained, and the steady, comforting hum of the Ghostlight itself. I realized then, with a profound and terrifying certainty, that these rules weren't just about avoiding trouble. They were about survival, and I was learning, painfully, hesitantly, that keeping the creatures of the Playhouse at bay was a constant, exhausting battle of will, a silent war waged every single night. And I was now on the front lines, a reluctant soldier in a conflict I barely understood. What other protections, what other appeasements, what other desperate measures were woven into the very fabric of the Mariner's Playhouse? And how long before one of these fragile rules broke, and whatever lay beyond the glare of the ghost light finally stepped into the full light of day? The guttural growl that had echoed through the prop storage, the feeling of an immense, unseen presence demanding its history back, had frozen me in place. The leather-bound script, The Mariner's Lament, felt impossibly heavy in my hands, a tangible link to the terrifying secrets of the Playhouse. I hadn't finished reading, hadn't dared to. The faint light and Mick's earlier words about the special box screamed at me to put it back. With trembling fingers, I slid the ancient volume back into its restricted box, pushing it deep behind the plywood sarcophagus. The growling subsided, but the sense of being watched, of having disturbed something profoundly ancient, lingered like the metallic tang in the air. That night, sleep was a battleground. My mind replayed the red annotations, the chilling correlations between the fictional play and the grim reality of the Playhouse's strange rules. Every creak of my apartment building, every distant siren, seemed imbued with the malevolent hum of the trapdoor, the mournful whisper of the proscenium arch. I was no longer just a stage technician. I was an unwilling scholar of a dark liturgy, privy to secrets that weighed on my soul like stage weights. The next few weeks brought a new production, a contemporary avant-garde piece called Reflection Ruin, and with it came a new director, a young, ambitious woman named Eleanor Vance. She was full of fresh ideas, cutting-edge concepts, and a complete, utter disregard for anything that smacked of old theater superstition. This, I knew, with a cold dread in my stomach, was going to be a problem. Eleanor was a whirlwind of energy, all sharp angles and decisive pronouncements. She swept into the Playhouse like a gale, her bright modern aesthetic clashing violently with the building's ancient brooding atmosphere. "Darling, this place is charming," she'd gush, "but we need to drag it into the 21st century. No more musty traditions, just raw, visceral art." Her favorite phrase, often delivered with a dismissive wave of her hand, was, "Let's break the fourth wall and maybe a few others while we're at it." Her design choices immediately set off alarm bells for me. For the set, she wanted an entire wall of the stage to be constructed from distressed mirrors. "It's about self-reflection, the shattered psyche," she explained to a bewildered Mick and Dave, who exchanged glances that spoke volumes of their shared apprehension. "Mirrors on stage, Eleanor," Mick started, his voice unusually strained, "especially facing the audience. That's not exactly standard practice. Bad luck, some say." He tried to sound casual, but the underlying tremor of fear was palpable. Eleanor just laughed, a bright, clear sound that felt horribly out of place in the dim, dusty wings. "Mick, darling, we're not running a seance. It's symbolism. Besides, the old superstitions are quaint. But we're about breaking boundaries, not building them." My mind immediately flashed back to dressing room 7, the tarnished mirror, and Dave's urgent, "Don't look in there, not ever." I thought of the red annotations in the Mariner's Lament. Reflections are not to be trusted. They hold more than they show. An entire wall of them? It felt like building a direct invitation, a grand gateway for whatever lurked behind the glass. Despite Mick and Dave's increasingly vocal, though carefully worded objections, Eleanor was unyielding. The mirror wall went up. It was enormous, a mosaic of dark, smoky glass panels stretching from wing to wing, reflecting the empty seats, the stage lights, and the bewildered faces of the crew. It was visually stunning, undeniably, but standing before it, I felt a deep, sickening unease. It wasn't just reflecting the theater, it felt like it was absorbing it, creating a distorted, hungry inverse of our reality. The unseen audience was now given a literal window, hundreds of them, into our world. Then came the issue of the trapdoor. For a dramatic reveal in the final act, Eleanor demanded that the central trapdoor, the very one that had lifted of its own accord, remain open for the entire duration of the scene. The abyss of despair, Sam. It needs to be a constant presence. We want the audience to feel the raw vulnerability. Mick almost choked on his coffee. Eleanor, that's a safety hazard, he stammered, his usual gruffness replaced by a desperate plea. And the draft, it'll ruin the atmosphere. He was clearly trying to find a mundane excuse, anything but the terrifying truth. A draft adds to the atmosphere, Mick. It's raw, Eleanor countered, completely missing the underlying terror in his voice. And we'll put up railings, some dim lighting underneath. Safety first, of course, but the concept dictates an open abyss. It's a key symbolic element. My stomach clenched. An open trapdoor for an entire scene. The hum, the acrid smell, the ripple in the darkness. It would be a gaping maw, a constant breach, not just for a few seconds, but for minutes, perhaps hours during performances. The final offering in the script of The Mariner's Lament began with an open trapdoor, a breach in the fabric of the known. Eleanor was not just breaking a rule, she was dismantling a critical part of the containment system. Dave, usually more reserved than Mick, pulled me aside during a lunch break. His face was etched with worry lines I hadn't seen before. "She's gonna get us all killed, Sam," he whispered, gesturing vaguely towards Eleanor, who was animatedly directing an actor. "Or worse, you felt what happened with that door. What do you think an open one is gonna do?" He then told me, in hushed, urgent tones, about the fifth wall. "We got the fourth wall, right? The invisible one. My apologies. It looks like my response got cut off midway when I was compiling the chapters. I intended to provide the complete story. I will continue from where it left off, the end of chapter 4, and provide the remaining chapters, 5, 6, 7, and 8, now to complete the story. Here are the remaining chapters, between the stage and the audience. Well, in this place, there's a fifth wall. It's the one we build with the rules, the ghost light, the mirrors, the dock, the trap door. They're all parts of it. They keep them out, or at least they keep them in their place, and she's tearing it down. His words painted a terrifying picture. We weren't just stage crew, we were masons of an invisible, metaphysical barrier, a team of unwitting wardens. And Eleanor, in her artistic fervor, was swinging a sledgehammer at its foundations. The increasingly bizarre demands extended to props. Eleanor wanted a specific antique music box to be a central prop, played repeatedly throughout the show. It was a beautiful, ornate thing, found in the Playhouse's forgotten archives, its mechanism still surprisingly functional. The problem? It was kept in a locked glass case, in a corner of the main office that Mick policed with the ferocity of a guard dog. "That music box," Mick had warned me once, his eyes fixed on it. "You don't open it. You don't wind it. Not ever. It plays a tune that it invites listening, and we don't want that. Not from them." But Eleanor was insistent. "It's the heart of the play, the melancholic melody, the ticking of time. We need it." Mick, usually unyielding, seemed to crumble under Eleanor's relentless pressure and the unspoken threat of his job. He handed over the key, his face grim, like a man signing his own death warrant. The music box was brought onto the stage, handled by actors who were blissfully unaware of its true, insidious nature. Its delicate, tinny melody, a mournful, cyclical tune, began to fill the Playhouse during rehearsals, a constant, gentle summons. As the days crawled by, the atmosphere in the Playhouse grew thick with tension. The veteran crew, Mick and Dave especially, moved like ghosts, their faces pale, their movements tight with suppressed fear. They adhered to the remaining rules with desperate fervor, performing the Ghostlight protocol with even greater solemnity, double-checking every latch and lock. But the violations were too grand, too central to the production. The mirror wall shimmered with a disturbing, almost liquid quality in the stage lights. The open trapdoor yawned like a hungry mouth, and the melancholic tune of the music box drifted through the building, a sweet, irresistible lure. I started to feel it too. The whispers were no longer faint. They were clearer, almost conversational, from the shadows of the wings, from the empty seats in the auditorium. They were distinct, overlapping voices, arguing, murmuring, sometimes singing in harmony with the music box's mournful tune. The cold spots were more frequent, more intense, leaving gooseflesh on my arms and a chill deep in my bones. I'd catch fleeting glimpses in the mirror wall, not my reflection, but something else, a distortion, a figure moving just at the edge of my peripheral vision, gone the instant I looked directly. During one particularly late rehearsal, with Eleanor barking directions and the music box playing its mournful tune, I watched the actor playing the protagonist deliver a monologue directly into the mirror wall. As he spoke, his reflected image seemed to waver, to stretch, to subtly distort, as if something behind the glass was reaching for him. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white, a profound sense of dread washing over me. Eleanor, caught up in the theatricality, was oblivious. The actor, lost in his performance, saw nothing. But I saw it, and I knew Dave and Mick saw it too, their faces drawn, their eyes constantly scanning the impossible reflections. Eleanor had not only broken the fifth wall, she had invited whatever was on the other side to come through. And now, the things that were kept out were beginning to seep in, no longer content with mere whispers and misplaced tools. They were growing bolder, more confident, drawn by the music, by the open gates, by the sheer audacity of being seen. The Playhouse was no longer a cage. It was a stage for something far older and more terrifying than any play, and we were all about to become unwilling, sacrificial players in its increasingly horrifying drama. The audience was not just watching, it was preparing to participate. Eleanor's deliberate dismantling of the Playhouse's strange rules had cracked the fifth wall wide open. The mirror wall shimmered with unsettling energy. The open trap door breathed a constant, cold breath of something ancient, and the melancholic, looping melody of the antique music box was a constant, insidious lure. The whispers, once faint and indistinct, now hummed around the edges of every sound, a murmurous chorus that seemed to follow us, gathering strength and clarity. The Playhouse was no longer merely responding, it was actively reaching out. The first noticeable shift was in the dreams. They started subtly, a shared undercurrent of unease that permeated our daily conversations. Dave, usually stoic, arrived one morning with dark circles under his eyes, complaining about a recurring nightmare of being trapped in an endless, echoing corridor, always trying to find a door that wasn't there. Mick just grunted, heard that one before, but his own eyes were bloodshot, confirming he wasn't immune. My own sleep was plagued by vivid, disjointed visions. The blackness beneath the trapdoor, extending into an oceanic abyss, full of unseen things that brushed against my skin. The mirror wall reflecting not my face, but a distorted, hungry maw that seemed to whisper my name. The dreams were deeply unsettling, a sensation of being utterly vulnerable, exposed to an immense, predatory gaze. We were all sharing a collective nightmare, played out not just in our sleep, but in the oppressive atmosphere of the Playhouse itself. The unseen audience was getting inside our heads, The green room, typically a haven of camaraderie and nervous energy before a show, became a hub of growing paranoia. It was meant to be a place of temporary escape from the stage, but it felt increasingly like another, smaller stage. Actors, usually boisterous and prone to dramatic flourishes, grew quiet, their chatter replaced by hushed conversations about strange occurrences. Props moved on their own, costumes would be found draped over chairs they hadn't been left on, and the pervasive cold spots seemed to cling to specific individuals, making them shiver uncontrollably, even in the warmth of the room. One afternoon, I was patching a frayed cable by the main stage entrance, just outside the green room, when I overheard a particularly disturbing conversation. Two of the younger actresses, barely out of drama school, were huddled together, their voices low and urgent. "Did you hear that?" One, a girl named Chloe, whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Last night, in my dressing room, it was a voice. Not a whisper, but a clear voice. It kept repeating lines from the play, but not like us. It was distorted, like it was underwater. I thought I was going crazy," the other actress, Sarah, not our green prop master, replied, clutching her arms. "I heard it too, from the wings during my monologue. It would mimicking me, but mocking, like it knew all my mistakes. Mimicking." The word sent a fresh wave of dread through me. The entities weren't just observing, they were learning, they were interacting, they were becoming part of the show, not just in their whispers, but in their eerie, distorted reflections of our own voices. The most unnerving manifestation, however, began with Jeremy, one of the lead actors. Jeremy was a talented but highly strung individual, prone to method acting, an intense emotional commitment to his roles. His character in Reflection Ruin was a tormented artist, slowly losing his grip on reality. It was a demanding role, and Jeremy threw himself into it with a ferocity that concerned even Eleanor. As the production progressed, Jeremy's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He'd stare blankly into the mirror wall for minutes on end, not just as his character, but as if genuinely captivated by something only he could see in the smoky reflections. He'd complain of extreme fatigue, saying he felt like he wasn't sleeping at all, even after hours in bed. Then, during rehearsals, he started to speak in strange tongues. It wasn't always obvious at first. He'd be delivering his lines, then, in the middle of a sentence, his voice would subtly shift, a different cadence, a peculiar inflection, words that weren't in the script, guttural and melodic at the same time, like the hum from the trapdoor, but shaped into syllables. He'd catch himself, look around, confused, and blame it on being too deep in character. But the words were too alien, too ancient sounding to be mere improvisation. One afternoon, during a particularly intense scene involving the music box, Jeremy was supposed to slowly wind it, listening to its mournful tune. As the melody filled the stage, Jeremy's eyes glazed over. He stopped winding, his hand frozen on the key, and then he began to sing. It wasn't a song from the play. It wasn't even English. It was a chilling, sorrowful lament, sung in the same guttural, ancient-sounding language I'd heard him slip into before. But this time, it was sustained, deliberate, perfectly harmonizing with the music box's melody. His voice was deep, resonant, and entirely unlike Jeremy's usual tenor. It sounded wrong. It was like the voice of something immense and oceanic, pouring through his mouth. Eleanor, initially mesmerized by what she thought was a brilliant, unscripted moment of method acting, eventually realized something was deeply amiss. "Jeremy? Jeremy, what are you doing?" she called out, her voice cracking with unease. Jeremy didn't respond. He just kept singing, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring into the depths of the mirror wall, his lips twisting around the impossible syllables. The music box played on, its melody intertwining with his haunting vocalizations. The air in the playhouse grew thick and heavy, the temperature plummeting, bringing with it that familiar metallic tang. Dave and Mick, their faces ashen, started backing away slowly, their eyes fixed on Jeremy with a mixture of horror and desperate recognition. Mick fumbled for the silver locket he always wore, clutching it tightly, his lips moving in a silent prayer or incantation. I felt a profound sense of violation, of watching a possession unfold in broad daylight. This wasn't acting. This was a conduit. Jeremy was no longer just a vessel for his character. He was a vessel for the playhouse itself, for whatever ancient hunger resonated within its walls. The unseen audience wasn't just observing or whispering. It was attempting to manifest, to speak, to perform through us. Eleanor, finally snapping out of her stunned silence, rushed towards Jeremy, trying to snap him out of it. "Jeremy, stop it. You're scaring everyone." As she reached him, Jeremy's head snapped towards her, his eyes still wide and unfocused, but now filled with a disturbing malevolence. His mouth opened, and instead of his own voice, a chorus of whispers erupted, overlapping, distorted, yet strangely articulate, emanating from his throat. They were not human words, but a cacophony of pleas and demands, ancient grievances, and a profound, insatiable hunger. It was the collective voice of the unseen audience, now amplified, given form through Jeremy. Mick, with a sudden, desperate surge of energy, lunged forward and slammed the lid of the music box shut with a sharp thwack. The melody cut off abruptly. The effect was instantaneous. Jeremy gasped, a choked, wet sound, and collapsed to his knees, his eyes rolling back in his head. The chorus of whispers died, replaced by a profound, ringing silence. The oppressive cold lifted slightly, though the metallic tang still lingered. Eleanor, shaken to her core, knelt beside Jeremy, who was now trembling uncontrollably, muttering incoherently about voices in the deep and something watching. She looked at Mick, her face pale, the usual fire in her eyes replaced by genuine terror. She had pushed too far. She had broken the fifth wall, and now, whatever was on the other side was not content to remain an unseen audience. It wanted to be the star. Mick helped Jeremy off the stage, his arm around the actor's shaking shoulders, his gaze sweeping over the mirror wall and the open trapdoor with grim resignation. He knew the cost of Eleanor's ambition. He knew the fragile peace had been shattered. The playhouse wasn't merely haunted anymore. It was an open gateway, and the things that wanted in were no longer content with dreams and whispers. They had found their voice, and soon, I feared, they would find their bodies. We had become the unwitting stage for a truly terrifying, unrehearsed performance, and the curtain, it seemed, was only just beginning to rise. The aftermath of that opening night was a blur of frantic activity and stunned silence. The audience, bless their oblivious hearts, eventually filtered out, some murmuring about the experimental nature of the technical difficulties, others simply demanding refunds. For us, backstage, the experience was seared into our minds like a brand. Mark, recovered from his near fall and hysterical ramblings, quit the play and the playhouse that very night, his face etched with a trauma no amount of acting could replicate. Eleanor Vance, utterly broken, spent the rest of the night curled in her office, sobbing quietly, her artistic ambition shattered by the sheer, undeniable terror she had finally witnessed. She left the playhouse permanently the next morning, never looking back. Mick, his arm bruised and possibly cracked from the sandbag's impact, just sat on a prop box, clutching his silver locket, his eyes staring blankly at the now sealed trapdoor. Dave, pale and trembling, helped clear the stage, his movements slow and methodical, like a man moving through deep water. We spoke little, the shared horror too profound for words. The scream from the trapdoor, that sound of pure, unadulterated fury and despair, still vibrated in my bones. It was the sound of a prisoner denied its freedom, a predator robbed of its prey. In the days that followed, the production of Reflection Ruin was quietly canceled. The Playhouse went dark, ostensibly for extensive renovations. But we, the remaining crew, knew the truth. It was a period of frantic damage control, of re-establishing the broken wards, of trying to force the malevolent entity back into its cage. Mick, despite his injury, spearheaded the effort with a grim, determined fervor. The mirror wall was taken down, panel by agonizing panel, each piece wrapped in heavy, light-blocking tarps before being carefully hauled out of the building and, I suspect, destroyed far away. The antique music box was returned to its locked glass case in the office, the key now kept on Mick's person, never to be touched again. The trapdoor was not only sealed, but reinforced with heavy iron plates, welded shut, a desperate attempt to permanently silence the abyss beneath. Each act felt less like maintenance and more like an exorcism. As for me, the incident had stripped away the last vestiges of my skepticism. The Playhouse wasn't just my workplace. It was a living, breathing entity, a prison, and a precarious ecosystem of unseen forces. I had walked the knife edge of its truth, and I had seen what lay beyond the fifth wall. The strange rules, once baffling and irritating, now made chilling, absolute sense. They weren't arbitrary traditions. They were the complex, delicate lock and chain on a truly ancient, terrifying beast. They were the price of our continued existence, the rituals that kept us, and whatever else resided in the Playhouse, relatively safe. One quiet afternoon, about a week after the incident, Mick and I were replacing some old ropes in the fly system. The Playhouse was utterly silent, the oppressive atmosphere replaced by a brittle, watchful stillness. Mick worked slowly, his movement stiff from his injury, but his gaze was sharp, constantly scanning the shadows. "You understand now, don't you, Sam?" he said, his voice low, barely audible in the vast space. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the intricate rigging above. "Yeah," I replied, my voice raspy. "The rules, they're not just for the show. They're to keep it in." Mick nodded slowly. "Not just it. Them. This place. It's a crossroads. Been here forever. Some things they found a way in a long time ago. They feed off attention, off emotion, off performances. That play, The Mariner's Lament, it didn't just tell a story. It created a space for them. It gave them a voice, a door." He paused, then looked at me, his eyes tired but resolute. "The rules, the protocols, they're like a script for our performance, a ritual we have to play out every single day to keep the doors shut, to keep them from getting too comfortable. The ghost light, the sealed mirrors, the loading dock, the trap door, they're all part of the act, our act. It's what keeps us from becoming the next characters in their story." I thought of the red annotations in The Mariner's Lament, the desperate warnings of a long-dead stage manager or director. They weren't just notes. They were the instructions for a century-long, never-ending drama of containment. We weren't just stagehands. We were the custodians of a prison, the quiet, unsung wardens of the Playhouse's darkest secrets. Mick handed me a new length of rope. "Eleanor, she tried to break the system, thought she was a genius, but she just stirred the pot, woke him up." He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "The scream, that was him. You took away their voice, their stage. They won't forget that. They'll remember you." A cold shiver traced its way down my spine. They'll remember you. The unseen audience, the hungry entities, now had a new target for their insidious attention. I was no longer just the new guy. I was a participant, an antagonist in their ongoing, unseen drama. My job at the Mariner's Playhouse, once a mundane means to an end, had become something else entirely. It was a duty, a solemn responsibility. I wasn't just fixing lights or moving flats. I was actively participating in a delicate life-or-death ritual, a constant struggle to maintain the fragile balance. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now tempered with a strange sense of purpose, a grim understanding. I was no longer afraid of Mick's gruffness or Dave's terse warnings. I understood them. I was becoming one of them. The Playhouse reopened after its renovations, the official line carefully maintained. New productions came and went, but the underlying operations were now meticulously, almost religiously adhered to. The ghost light was positioned dead center every single night, its glow respected. Dressing room 7 remained dark and unused, its mirror forgotten. The loading dock was carefully monitored after every departure, and the reinforced trapdoor remained steadfastly shut, a permanent, defiant barrier. I continued to clock in, to work alongside Mick and Dave, our unspoken understanding deepening with every passing shift. We were the keepers of the strange rules, the quiet sentinels of the Mariners' Playhouse. The whispers still came, faint and teasing, from the shadows. The cold spots still appeared, chilling the air. But now I knew their source, their intent, and I knew how to ignore them, how to deny them the acknowledgement they craved. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm the last one in the building, after the ghost light is set and the doors are locked, I walk through the vast, empty auditorium. The silence is profound, but it's never truly empty. I can feel the presence of the unseen audience, a vast, hungry throng waiting in the darkness beyond the stage's single, defiant bulb. I can almost hear their murmurs, their expectant whispers. They are still here. They are always here. My gaze often drifts to the sealed trapdoor, to the place where that primal scream had erupted. I know what lies beneath, and I know what that scream represented. A promise of retribution, a vow of eventual release. The Playhouse is a prison, but it's also a stage. And though the performance has been temporarily paused, the encore of dread is inevitable. We, the custodians of the strange rules, can only hope we've built a cage strong enough to hold back the things that patiently wait for their next bloody act to begin. And I, Sam, the stage technician, am now an integral, permanent part of this terrifying, unending show. All right, let's bring this terrifying saga to its chilling conclusion. Here is Chapter 8, The Encore of Dread. The aftermath of that opening night was a blur of frantic activity and stunned silence. The audience, bless their oblivious hearts, eventually filtered out, some murmuring about the experimental nature of the technical difficulties, others simply demanding refunds. For us, backstage, the experience was seared into our minds like a brand. Mark, recovered from his near fall and hysterical ramblings, quit the play and the Playhouse that very night, his face etched with a trauma no amount of acting could replicate. Eleanor Vance, utterly broken, spent the rest of the night curled in her office, sobbing quietly, her artistic ambition shattered by the sheer, undeniable terror she had finally witnessed. She left the Playhouse permanently the next morning, never looking back. Mick, his arm bruised and possibly cracked from the sandbag's impact, just sat on a prop box, clutching his silver locket, his eyes staring blankly at the now sealed trap door. Dave, pale and trembling, helped clear the stage, his movements slow and methodical, like a man moving through deep water. We spoke little, the shared horror too profound for words. The scream from the trap door, that sound of pure, unadulterated fury and despair, still vibrated in my bones. It was the sound of a prisoner denied its freedom, a predator robbed of its prey. In the days that followed, the production of Reflection Ruin was quietly canceled. The Playhouse went dark, ostensibly for extensive renovations. But we, the remaining crew, knew the truth. It was a period of frantic damage control, of re-establishing the broken wards, of trying to force the malevolent entity back into its cage. Mick, despite his injury, spearheaded the effort with a grim, determined fervor. The mirror wall was taken down, panel by agonizing panel, each piece wrapped in heavy, light-blocking tarps before being carefully hauled out of the building and, I suspect, destroyed far away. The antique music box was returned to its locked glass case in the office, the key now kept on Mick's person, never to be touched again. The trapdoor was not only sealed, but reinforced with heavy iron plates, welded shut, a desperate attempt to permanently silence the abyss beneath. Each act felt less like maintenance and more like an exorcism. As for me, the incident had stripped away the last vestiges of my skepticism. The Playhouse wasn't just my workplace. It was a living, breathing entity, a prison, and a precarious ecosystem of unseen forces. I had walked the knife edge of its truth, and I had seen what lay beyond the fifth wall. The strange rules, once baffling and irritating, now made chilling, absolute sense. They weren't arbitrary traditions. They were the complex, delicate lock and chain on a truly ancient, terrifying beast. They were the price of our continued existence, the rituals that kept us, and whatever else resided in the Playhouse, relatively safe. One quiet afternoon, about a week after the incident, Mick and I were replacing some old ropes in the fly system. The Playhouse was utterly silent, the oppressive atmosphere replaced by a brittle, watchful stillness. Mick worked slowly, his movements stiff from his injury, but his gaze was sharp, constantly scanning the shadows. "You understand now, don't you, Sam?" he said, his voice low, barely audible in the vast space. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the intricate rigging above. "Yeah," I replied, my voice raspy. "The rules, they're not just for the show, they're to keep it in." Mick nodded slowly. "Not just it. Them. This place. It's a crossroads. Been here forever. Some things they found a way in a long time ago. They feed off attention, off emotion, off performances. That play, The Mariner's Lament, it didn't just tell a story. It created a space for them. It gave them a voice, a door." He paused, then looked at me, his eyes tired but resolute. "The rules, the protocols, they're like a script for our performance. A ritual we have to play out every single day to keep the door shut, to keep them from getting too comfortable. The ghost light, the sealed mirrors, the loading dock, the trap door, they're all part of the act. Our act. It's what keeps us from becoming the next characters in their story." I thought of the red annotations in The Mariner's Lament, the desperate warnings of a long-dead stage manager or director. They weren't just notes, they were the instructions for a century-long, never-ending drama of containment. We weren't just stagehands, we were the custodians of a prison, the quiet, unsung wardens of the Playhouse's darkest secrets. Mick handed me a new length of rope. Eleanor, she tried to break the system, thought she was a genius, but she just stirred the pot, woke him up. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. The scream, that was him. You took away their voice, their stage. They won't forget that. They'll remember you. A cold shiver traced its way down my spine. They'll remember you. The unseen audience, the hungry entities, now had a new target for their insidious attention. I was no longer just the new guy. I was a participant, an antagonist in their ongoing unseen drama. My job at the Mariner's Playhouse, once a mundane means to an end, had become something else entirely. It was a duty, a solemn responsibility. I wasn't just fixing lights or moving flats. I was actively participating in a delicate life or death ritual, a constant struggle to maintain the fragile balance. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now tempered with a strange sense of purpose, a grim understanding. I was no longer afraid of Mick's gruffness or Dave's terse warnings. I understood them. I was becoming one of them. The Playhouse reopened after its renovations, the official line carefully maintained. New productions came and went, but the underlying operations were now meticulously, almost religiously, adhered to. The ghost light was positioned dead center every single night, its glow respected. Dressing room 7 remained dark and unused, its mirror forgotten. The loading dock was carefully monitored after every departure, and the reinforced trapdoor remained steadfastly shut, a permanent, defiant barrier. I continued to clock in, to work alongside Mick and Dave, our unspoken understanding deepening with every passing shift. We were the keepers of the strange rules, the quiet sentinels of the Mariners' Playhouse. The whispers still came, faint and teasing, from the shadows. The cold spots still appeared, chilling the air. But now I knew their source, their intent, and I knew how to ignore them, how to deny them the acknowledgement they craved. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm the last one in the building, after the ghost light is set and the doors are locked, I walk through the vast, empty auditorium. The silence is profound, but it's never truly empty. I can feel the presence of the unseen audience, a vast, hungry throng waiting in the darkness beyond the stage's single, defiant bulb. I can almost hear their murmurs, their expectant whispers. They are still here. They are always here. My gaze often drifts to the sealed trapdoor, to the place where that primal scream had erupted. I know what lies beneath, and I know what that scream represented. A promise of retribution, a vow of eventual release. The Playhouse is a prison, but it's also a stage. And though the performance has been temporarily paused, the encore of dread is inevitable. We, the custodians of the strange rules, can only hope we've built a cage strong enough to hold back the things that patiently wait for their next bloody act to begin. And I, Sam, the stage technician, am now an integral, permanent part of this terrifying, unending show.